Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to Gen X CVA, the Strokecast, where a Generation X stroke survivor talks about rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand. I am Bill Monroe, and I am excited to get started on this project. But just my name doesn't tell you a whole lot, so first of all, who am I? Well, as I said, I am a Generation X stroke survivor. I grew up in New York City, in Queens, and eventually went to school in Helena, Montana, because who doesn't like a completely radical change at a crucial moment in their life? I had an awesome 4 years at Carroll College, largely because of the fantastic speech and debate team they have. Eventually, I moved on to Boise, Idaho, and then work took me to Seattle in 1998. And that's where I live today with my long-term girlfriend who keeps me out of the kitchen and is generally awesome. And throughout my stroke experience has also been absolutely fantastic. I have been incredibly lucky from that perspective. I mentioned that work is what took me to Seattle. So what do? Well, my job is basically I am a corporate trainer and product evangelist. So it's my job to help teach people how to sell products, how to get excited about products, and how to use those products to make their work and personal lives better. I've worked for some of the largest companies in the world, including Microsoft and Toshiba. And currently I do a number of freelance projects, and I also host another podcast called 2-Minute Talk Tips. Generally, as I'm looking at my freelance projects or longer-term projects, I'm looking for roles and opportunities where I can speak, write, teach, and travel, because those are the experiences I really enjoy participating in and where I can really bring value to other folks. I have a few different goals for this podcast and a few different things I want to accomplish with Strokecast here. First of all, I do want to share my story. I want to have a platform where I can talk about what I went through and what I still go through, the things that I'm learning and challenges that I'm facing, especially when those are challenges that a lot of other folks are probably facing as well. I also want to give other folks a chance to share their stories, because there are a lot of fantastic stories out there. And one of the things I've learned from my time in high tech is that basically we all want to be heard. That's one of the big reasons why social media has become as big as it has. We want to be able to tell our stories, to share our pictures, to share our lives, or the parts of our lives that we want to share with a larger audience. We want other people to acknowledge our existence and acknowledge our experiences and acknowledge the things that we go through, both the good and the not so good. And stroke can actually make that harder. Sometimes it literally makes it more difficult due to challenges around aphasia or apraxia of speech. And sometimes it's simply because the nature of living with disabilities in our modern society. So I want to help share stories, and I want to help share your stories and help you be heard. I also want to explore more about the academic nature of stroke. I want to talk about books that I'm reading about neuroplasticity and about stroke experience, things that I find helpful from these books that other folks might find helpful as well. I want to talk about this concept of neuroplasticity, which for the most part was unheard of 20 years ago, and yet today it governs all of these improvements that we can continue to see in our lives. I want to talk about more brain discoveries, because what's happening in neuroscience is really exciting. We think we know a lot about the brain, but we keep finding out more and more stuff. It really is an ever-evolving mystery, and there's tons of exciting things happening in there that give it more flexibility and that can really help us live the lives that we want to live. I also want to talk about the research that's going on out there, because a lot of times people hear research or they just see headlines on the news and they don't actually get the details. And it's those details that really make this stuff exciting and that really let the potential of these projects and these experiments and all this research really come alive to have an impact. I also want to talk to other professionals in the community, whether that's going to be occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists, recreational therapists, doctors, or really anyone else who's involved in the professional stroke research or stroke recovery community, to learn more about what each of these individuals do and to share that with the greater audience, to share some of the creative techniques and therapies that they come up with, and to really tell more stories about how people recover from stroke and how people gain more and more of their lives back. And perhaps to share some new and original approaches that we might not have thought about. This community of people who see us at our worst, who help us get through that and back to a life. They're some of the best professionals that I've ever worked with. And there are tons of them out there with tons of things to share. And of course, I also want to talk to some of the most critical people in our lives today. And that's our caregivers, our partners, the folks who work with us when the doctors aren't around, the folks who have to live with us and see how we get around in the home, to adapt to what we can and cannot do. The folks who may have had their lives turned upside down when suddenly we're not able to do everything that we used to do, and that they're the ones who have to now pick up the slack. And how so many of them are so happy to do it because they care and because they are a part of our lives, and the caregivers are such an essential part of our recoveries. I also want to share tips and hacks because as we go through and as we adapt to life with disabilities, there are a ton of little things that we can do to make life easier. And I want to share as many of those as I can with our broader community. Things that I've learned and that I've found for myself, and perhaps hacks and tricks and tips that you've picked up as you've adapted to your own world. I want to share those with the broader audience, and I want to hear what you've learned. I also want to provide resources because there are a lot of resources out there, lots of research, lots of different support groups in various cities and around the country, other podcasts, and all these other different things that are out there that can help. But they can only help us if we know about them and if we know where to find them. So I want to help you find more of those other resources as well that can help make your life better. And of course, one of the best ways to expand this support community is simply by sharing more of these stories, by helping one another connect with resources, with people, and with ideas that can help us live better and better lives. So I guess I will kick all of this off by telling my stroke story. Because it's really interesting. One of the things that I find happens when I encounter other stroke survivors these days is that it's sort of that first bonding that we have with one another is sharing the story of how we got to where we are today and what that happened, what that life-changing moment was. Because in my case, and in the case of many folks, it's one of those things where, I went to bed feeling perfectly healthy, or for what passed for perfect health in my life at that point, but feeling perfectly, quote-unquote, normal, whatever that means. And yet, I woke up and my life was completely different. On the morning of June 3rd, I woke up at about 7 a.m., which is just shockingly and ridiculously early for anybody to be waking up on a Saturday morning. But I woke up at 7 a.m. to go use the bathroom, and my arm felt funny. So I figured I must have slept on it wrong, and I pondered the idea of sleeping wrong just as a concept. But it wasn't responding, so I just assumed it was sort of still asleep. It was a little bit different than normal, but what are you going to do? So as I got done sort of, taking care of the appropriate business, that's when I noticed my legs started to get a little wonky, and my left leg started to go offline. So I managed to stumble back into the bedroom and wake up the girlfriend, who quickly knew something was wrong. I asked her if she could understand what I was saying to see if I, still had my language, and I did. And told her to just call an ambulance. And she instantly knew what was wrong and told the folks at 911 that I was having a stroke. They got the ambulance to my place and quickly confirmed our diagnosis and loaded me up and took us for the short, 1 3/4 miles to the hospital nearby that had a specialized neuro unit. It was about a $900 ambulance ride, which I think was probably still cheaper than some of the Uber surge pricing that I've seen. But once I got there, the hospital wheeled me right into CT, then right into a private room in the emergency department. Then I got the sonogram of my heart, and then I got wheeled back down for an MRI, and back into the emergency room, and then up to a room on the neuro floor. As this was going on, I still had some use of the arm and some use of the leg. Not a lot, but limited use. But as the day went on, by around 3 p.m., I had lost all use of the arm and the leg, and my face was drooping even more. And that's kind of about the point where I pretty much bottomed out. They took me for another CT scan that evening, and ultimately confirmed a diagnosis, where the official diagnosis is cerebrovascular accident, CVA, due to thrombosis of the right middle cerebral artery. Basically, I broke my basal ganglia due to a blood clot. The basal ganglia is the part of the brain that basically controls the movement. So if you decide to raise your arm in part of your brain, that basically routes that instruction through the basal ganglia, which then translates that for the motor neurons to actually go ahead and engage that. And in my case now, a big chunk of it is, well, a chunk of scar tissue. Because I had gone to sleep feeling fine and woken up with symptoms, there was no way to tell if I was still within the window for a TPA or other treatment, so there was really no medical intervention they could really engage in at that point. So I spent a few more days in the neurofloor, and then they moved me up to inpatient rehab, and I spent 3.5 weeks up getting some fantastic inpatient rehab from the team over at the Swedish Medical Center. Eventually, I came home at the beginning of July and began figuring out this new life. Reading other folks' stories, I realized that despite how significant it is to suddenly not be able to walk easily anymore, to suddenly lose an arm, essentially, I was actually very lucky. I didn't have any vision things. I didn't have any issues with aphasia, which is really important for someone who makes their living as a speaker and a writer. And I didn't have any other cognitive issues. So I was very fortunate in that respect. And after I'd been home for a couple of months, I was even able to go ahead and get approved for driving again, which was very nice. So anyway, here I am, about 8.5 months post-stroke now, and I can walk okay with a cane. My shoulder is getting stronger. I have some elbow use, and I'm hoping to get fingers back sometime this summer. So it could be a lot worse, and at least now I have an excuse to carry a cool cane around with me when I go places. So overall, recovery is still happening. It's not as quick as I would like, but it is coming along there. It takes work, so do most things that are worth doing. My approach to recovery is basically the same as the approach I use when it comes to public speaking. And I teach this in my public speaking podcast. And that's don't get best, get better. The idea is not to focus on being perfect or getting back to 100%. That can be fine to think about in the back of your mind for long term. But the focus really needs to be not on getting to be the absolute best, but instead just to get a little bit better every day. Because if I can get just a little bit better every day, that's going to give me the continual improvement that I need to ultimately get back to wherever it is I want to get. Consistent, regular work is going to be critical to that long-term recovery. So that's my story. There are other elements of my recovery and of my story and probably of my time in the hospital that I'll share on future episodes as it becomes relevant, but that sort of gives you the core of where I'm at now. And that brings me to our first ever hack of the week, and that is how to peel a banana with one hand. I actually do this 2 different ways depending on the situation. First of all, if I don't have any tools available and I'm just holding a banana, first thing I'll do is hold the banana gently in my fist. I'll have the long side of the curve facing away from me, which means the stem points slightly towards me. Then make sure I grip it gently in my good fist, and I push my thumb against the stem to bend it back. Now, 2 things could happen at this point. Ideally, that alone might tear the stem off the very top of the peel, and then I can just work the peel down with my middle finger and my index finger. What's more likely is that the stem won't tear away from the peel, but instead, on the far side of the banana, on the longer curved side, what will happen is the peel will start to split along one of the edges. And then I can work my index finger into that split in the peel, move my finger up the stem, and split the stem. Then I can grip one piece of that split stem between my index finger and my middle finger, and I can slowly work that down, and then come back up and do the other side. Or once I have that split and it started like that, I could even just lay it down on the counter and then start gripping with my thumb and my other fingers to pull the peel down. The other technique is great if you happen to have a cutting board and even a butter knife, but something that you can cut through the banana, because if you have those tools, then what I found is that I can easily cut the banana in half across the middle, and then I can easily get my fingers in between the skin and the fruit itself and peel the peel away that way. Sure, it's easier, but it is a little bit messier. But regardless, 2 techniques for peeling a banana with one hand. So what would I like you to do now with this information? First of all, I would love to talk with other survivors, caregivers, medical and industry professionals, and others with stories and information to share about stroke and stroke recovery. I'd also love to share other resources with you, resources that I find and resources that you know about, whether those are going to be local events and meetups for stroke survivors, other stroke-related podcasts that you find useful, great websites that you find useful, and really just other resources that are out there to share with the community. If you would like to appear on this podcast, or if you have other resources to share, go ahead and send me an email. I am bill@strokecast.com, or you can reach out to me on Twitter @currentlybill. Keep an eye out for future episodes here at strokecast.com, and in the coming weeks, you'll even be able to subscribe to the Strokecast in your favorite podcast app. And finally, as you do that consistent work on your recovery, I'd like you to remind you to don't get best, get better. I'm Bill Monroe. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. I'd like to remind you that in this podcast, I provide general information and hopefully entertainment, but not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting with your personal doctor or medical team. Gen X CVA, the Strokecast, is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.